Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show that covers all things marketing. The GSMC Marketing News Podcast gives you the latest marketing news, from what major businesses have planned for the coming year to the newest trends in advertising, from podcasts, digital and streaming, to the old standbys of radio, television, and billboards. Whether you're a marketing agent or a business trying to expand your brand, you've come to the right place. The GSMC Marketing News Podcast starts now.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the GSMC Marketing Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Mackenzie, and on today's episode, guys, it's Wednesday. I'm sure we're all a little bit stuck in our own heads about the week. It's been a long week. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm sure I'm not alone here either. And what is the perfect cure for a long week on a Wednesday? Some adult beverages, which is what we are talking about today on the GSMC Marketing Podcast. We are talking about the adult beverage industry. We are talking about alcohol. We'll call this episode Boozy Marketing. Basically, I'm not encouraging anyone to drink, nor am I encouraging anyone to partake in the alcohol industry. Let's make that very clear right now. However, I do find it fascinating, the different advertising and marketing strategies that are used in that world and in that industry. And if you are new to the podcast, we like examining different industries on here, and we like taking a look at industries that are vastly different from our own and using their strategies to relate to our industry and to come up with new ideas for marketing campaigns and advertising strategies that could help us with our own company, even if we do not sell anything at all related to the same industry. If you are not at all interested in the adult beverage industry, in alcohol and beer and hard alcohol and liquor and well drinks, whatever it may be that we're talking about today, but you still want to hear other marketing strategies, then I encourage you to check out some of our other episodes. We have done Disney, Frozen, coffee, just Netflix, all of the big industries. There are more to come as well. We'll be talking about some tech industries later this week, so stay tuned for that. But today we are talking about the alcohol industry. First, we'll be going over 8 different strategies that I believe you can take from the alcohol industry and use in your own marketing, even if you are not a part of the alcohol industry or you make something completely different. Second, we will be talking about some rules and regulations the alcohol industry actually has to follow when it comes to their marketing. And finally, we are going to go over some famous marketing examples from the alcohol industry. So stay tuned for all of that and more on today's episode of the GSMC Marketing Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. So get your pen and paper ready, guys, because we are jumping right into today's episode. First, let's talk about some marketing strategies we can take straight from the alcohol world. Number 1, put your focus on something other than the product or drinking. So this is a big thing because later when we talk about the rules and regulations about alcohol, their commercials always have to be, and their social media always has to be very not focused on what the actual product of alcohol is. Showing drunk people on TV, showing people being intoxicated in your commercials and on your advertising isn't going to do well for your media, because a lot of people, that will make them uncomfortable and they will not be interested in participating with your ad or engaging with your content. So they have to draw the focus away from that and instead focus it on something else that will still encourage you to buy the product. A very good example of this is when beer is often described as being fresh or fruity or vibrant. Now, we all know beer is basically just bread soda. So what part of just a whole bunch of bread, a whole bunch of carbs is refreshing and or light enough to be considered fresh? It's not. It's beer. Often, if you have one of them, it will make you feel very heavy. But their advertising draws you away from the feeling you'll get if you drink beer and more to the taste itself. This is an advertising tactic. So if you have something in your product that perhaps you believe doesn't jive well with your industry or with your consumers, say you sell coffee and you don't want to talk about the addiction to caffeine that people get or the crash people can get if they drink too much coffee, then you're going to draw the attention away from that and instead focus it on how rich and how gourmet your beans may be. Strategy number 2. Offer exclusive behind-the-scenes access. So this is really interesting when it comes to the alcohol industry because some of the prettiest photos I have ever seen in this entire world for marketing is of the alcohol industry. You can make a drink look so aesthetically pleasing that it does not even matter what it tastes like. It looks so good. And this is true with the behind the scenes as well. People are fascinated with breweries and distilleries and how alcohol actually gets made. So, what I ask you, what is the most interesting part of your process? Is it, again, if you make coffee, is it how the beans are grown? Is it the gardens that the beans grow on? Is it the harvesting? Is it the grounding? Is it the roasting? Is it when they finally get grounded up and turned into the coffee? Is it the coffee beverage itself? Ask yourself what the most aesthetically pleasing element is, and then focus your content on that. Number 3, build a community. This is probably the most important thing I can teach you guys. It comes up no matter what industry we are looking at because people want to feel as though they aren't just buying a product. If they are going to buy something local from a small business, from a small community, they want to feel as though they are a part of a community. And there's only one way to do that. That is to build a community. Make people feel involved with the product and with the industry. Number 4, engage regularly on social media. So something the alcohol industry can get away with that a lot of other industries can't is their rules and regulations around social media are a little bit looser. You don't ever want to hear from your favorite housing development about how drunk they got last night. But on social media, for alcohol, that is perfectly acceptable to use more relaxed language and have more of a conversation. And because of that, it becomes so extremely important that they engage with their audience. It's what helps build that community and create a connection between the product and the consumer. Strategy number 5, don't be afraid to use comedy. Later when we talk about the different examples, we'll be talking about Aviation Gin, which is my favorite gin to this day. I absolutely love it. Ryan Reynolds, that company, everything they do is so freaking spot on with their marketing. And they definitely use comedy as one of their tools in their tools belt. And if you want to learn more about comedy and marketing, we did a whole episode on that, and I encourage you to go listen to that. But basically, the focal point of that episode is that it is okay not to take yourself so seriously all of the time. Look at your faults and talk about them openly and honestly and make a joke about them because that's real life. That's humans. People make mistakes, people mess up, and people want to see other people, especially companies, make mistakes as well. Number 6. Now, hold on, you're going to be upset with number 6 because of what I just said. But number 6 is don't be afraid to take yourself seriously. Yes, occasionally we have to poke fun at ourselves and or others, and we need things to be light and fun. But also it is okay to say we are the best at this. It is okay to say we are the luxury brand. It is okay to say, hey, this is serious. Listen to us. We know what we're talking about. By establishing yourself as a knowledgeable person in the industry, you are able to then take yourself a little bit more seriously and take your brand a little bit more seriously. Grey Goose Vodka, which we'll talk about later, takes themselves very seriously, and that reflects in their marketing. So do not be afraid to take yourself seriously when you need to. Strategy number 7. Don't make users click away to access content. This is a big deal in the alcohol industry because people really want you to stay on their page so that you buy the alcohol that they are trying to sell. And how do they do that? They put all the content you could possibly need on one page, on one website, so that if you need to look up the alcohol content of something, where it was made, how it was made, it's all there so that people don't have to click away. So if you are in an industry that is a little bit more niche, or even if it isn't niche, there's tons and tons of information out there. Make sure that on your website, people can find all the information they need about your product and the industry on one site so that they don't go looking at other sources and possibly not buy from you. Finally, strategy number 8 is to connect with relevant events featuring your product. So when I say that, I don't just mean your specific product, but in the industry for alcohol, there are things like Oktoberfest and beer festivals and wine tastings, and people do Sober October. And although Sober October doesn't have anything to do would actually probably, lower sales, it's still important for them to interact with that idea because it does impact their overall company and their overall industry. So if there are events and trends happening near you that involve your industry, make sure you are aware with them and make sure you connect with them as well. Okay, everyone, we are going to go ahead and take a short break from the podcast, but when we come back, we are jumping right back in with some rules and regulations that the alcohol industry has to follow when they talk about their marketing. So stay tuned for more of the GSMC Marketing Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Mackenzie Jaquish, and I'll be right back.
Golden State Media Concepts Technology Podcast covers everything tech. The hottest mobile phones, tablets, games. We review it, rate it, test it. Whether you're Microsoft or Apple, Android or iPhone, we'll give it to you again. Black and white. The Golden State Media Concepts Technology Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Marketing Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Mackenzie Jaquish, and on today's episode, we are talking about some boozy marketing. Now, I want to make it very clear to all of our listeners, if you are not of legal drinking age in the country that you live in, then please drink responsibly. Don't drink at all, obviously, if you're not of legal drinking age. Basically, what I'm trying to get at here, guys, roundabout way, I am not endorsing alcohol or the consumption of alcohol by any means in this podcast. We are simply talking about marketing strategies that are involved in that world, and hopefully they will help you create marketing strategies for your industry and your world, even if it has nothing at all to do with alcohol. So please do not take this as me being a commercial or an advocate or anything like that for alcoholic beverages. This is just simply an industry that I believe is worth exploring. And on this podcast, we don't shy away from exploring different industries and different paths that may help you with your marketing. So we have talked about Frozen, Disney, Netflix, Superman, Batman. We have talked about pretty much Barbie. We have talked about pretty much every single industry you can think of, but there are still so many episodes to come about industries that maybe you didn't think of for marketing strategies. I plan on doing one later this week. Stay tuned for it, where we talk about the tech industry and how their marketing has been impacted over the past couple of years. The GSMC Marketing Podcast really is meant to be a one-stop shop where you can get your questions answered for all of your marketing needs, but also it'll hopefully inspire you to create new marketing content and new marketing strategies that maybe you didn't think of before, which is why I explore industries such as the alcohol, coffee, and Barbie, and like Maytel toys, because I think it's something that we use every day, we interact with every day, those marketing strategies, but maybe we don't consider them helpful or useful in our own company. When in actuality, they can be extremely useful and extremely helpful because every industry needs good marketing. Everyone needs good tactical advertising strategies. And I think it's important to study those so that we can be aware of them. And hopefully they will help us in our own marketing as well. If you enjoy listening to the GSMC Marketing Podcast, I would love it if you could join our community by subscribing. You are not truly a GSMC Marketing Podcast listener unless you are subscribed. So please hit that little purple button if you're on Apple Podcasts, or the green button if you're on Spotify, because I would love for you to join our community. I would love to hear your feedback. I'd love to hear your comments, your questions, and your concerns. Let's make this a place that you want to hang out at. Let's make it a conversation. I want you to get everything you could possibly need out of this podcast and more. And I can only do that if you subscribe. So take a second, subscribe, and I'll wait to start the episode. All right, though, but in all seriousness, before the break, we went over 8 different marketing strategies taken straight from the alcohol beverage world that I believe will help your marketing. So just to review, in case maybe you missed a few, number 1 was to put the focus on something other than the product of drinking. Number 2 was to offer exclusive behind-the-scenes access to how your product is made. Number 3 was to build a community. Number 4 was to engage regularly with that community. Number 5 was to not be afraid to use comedy. And number 6 was don't be afraid to take yourself seriously. Number 7 was don't make users click away to access content. Keep everything relevant on one page. Number 8 was to connect with relevant events and fads going on near your product that perhaps involve your industry. So now that we are back, I find the alcohol industry to be very fascinating when it comes to all the rules and regulations they have to follow. This is something that maybe you won't consider in your day-to-day world, but I think it's important to remember, especially before we look at examples of the alcohol industry, so that we can be aware that they do have a set of guidelines to follow that perhaps restricts their marketing in ways that ours does not get restricted. Also, guys, friendly reminder, I am recording this from my home. So if you hear horns going on in the background, that's because a car alarm was just set off. And I do deeply apologize. I have tried waiting for it to turn off, but it does not seem like it is turning off anytime soon. So I apologize. We are in month 4 of recording from home because of the coronavirus pandemic. I'm sure you all are struggling with similar activities happening while you're trying to work. So bear with me and we'll get through this together. All right, let's go through the rules and regulations. Number 1, they cannot have statements that are misleading, false, or untrue. So this basically means if an alcohol company was to tell you that this alcohol will let you lose weight, this will make your skin better, this will help you get girls, they cannot print anything that is misleading, false, or untrue. Everything that is talked about in the industry needs to be an actual fact, and they need to have proof to back it up. This is something that doesn't really happen in other industries, i.e. Red Bull gives you wings. No, it doesn't. But they have to be very honest and very true with all of their marketing. Number 2, they cannot say anything negative or disparaging about a competitor. You will never hear Grey Goose Vodka talk smack about Smirnoff Vodka. It's not going to happen. They have to be friendly neighbors to each other. And I think this is actually a very positive rule. I think it's something that a lot of industries should actually maybe take note of, because it does create more of an open environment and it allows people to shop around and not just feel like they are committed to one brand of alcohol. Number 3, they cannot have anything indecent or obscene, represented designs or statements on their alcohol advertisements. You cannot have, for instance, like a naked woman or an underage teenager drinking, nothing like that. It needs to all be positive and reinforce the idea of respectful drinking and responsible drinking. Number 4, they cannot misrepresent, analyze standards, or tests. So they cannot say, oh, our beer is near 3.4 to 4.5% alcohol. No, everything they say needs to be exactly to the point, and they need to live up to standards and different tests that the alcohol industry lays out for them. Number 5, it guarantees that there are misleading, excluding money-back guarantees. So that's just a little bit more, just the small print, guys. Always check it. With alcohol companies, it will always be factual. Number 6, statements that falsely misrepresent the health benefits of alcohol. Just like smoking, just like tobacco, they do need to talk about if it is bad for you, how bad it is for you, and they cannot misrepresent themselves by saying, oh no, this beer is really healthy for you. It's going to totally help your liver. It's going to improve blood circulation. Nothing like that. Again, everything needs to be true. Number 7, they cannot have claims that alcohol is made, sold, or marketed under the federal or state regulations. So this is different depending on every state and the different regulations that they lay out. But basically, again, each state will have different rules and different regulations that the alcohol industry has to follow. And so they cannot make any claims that the alcohol is made or sold or marketed under those federal or state regulations if it doesn't. Number 8, words such as bonded are basically insinuating that alcohol is made under government supervision is 100% banned. Number 9, claims that wine or malt beverages contains distilled spirits. That is also banned. Number 10, statements about distilled spirits being double or triple distilled unless they really truly are, i.e. you can have like a triple distilled vodka or a double distilled whiskey. I don't know if that last one's true. I don't know much about whiskey. All right. The word pure when advertising distilled spirits, unless it is referring to a specific ingredient, is not allowed. And finally, number 12, statements that are not consistent with approved labeling. So if you don't know what the approved labeling system is, we'll run through it really quickly. So malt beverages and beer. So for that approved labeling, they have to have the class of the product that it belongs to, i.e. if it is an ale, a stout, or a lager. The second thing for malt beverages and beers, they have to have the name and address, including the city of state for the beer company, where it was brewed, where it was made, and where it was sold. For wine, they have to have the type, class, and or distinctive designation that the product belongs to, such as red wine, sparkling wine, white wine, champagne, rosé, whatever you may have to be drinking for wine. And finally, you also still need to have the name and address, including the city and the state of the advertiser. For distilled spirits, you need to have the class and type of the product. If it is a whiskey, vodka, flavored spirit, you need to have the alcohol content listed as a % by volume. You again need to have the name and address, including the city and state of the advertiser. If applicable, you need to have the name of the commodity and percentage of neutral spirits must be included. So there are just a few facts about the alcohol industry and the advertising rules and regulations they have to follow. When we come back from our break, we will be talking about some examples of the alcohol industry where they have had to follow those rules and regulations, but also where they have followed our strategies we talked about earlier. So stay tuned for more of the GSMC Marketing Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Mackenzie Jaquish, and I'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Marketing Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Mackenzie Jaquish, and on today's episode, let me just be very, very clear about one thing. I am not endorsing alcohol, nor am I encouraging you to go out on a Wednesday night and start drinking adult beverages. I am, however, encouraging you to take a look at the adult beverage industry and take some notes on it and educate yourself on other industries that are outside of your own. However, I did realize while recording this podcast that perhaps I made it too clear that, this is for people who don't work in the industry and you're just taking notes from it. If you do work in the alcohol industry and you are listening to this podcast, then I hope this just encourages you to continue creating amazing content, and it helps you create better content, more engaging content, and helps you focus in on some of these strategies. And if you do, I would love to hear from you and hear your thoughts on today's episode. And there is one great way for me to hear about your thoughts on the episode. It is to write a review. So go ahead. It'll take you all but 2 seconds to write a review. I don't even care if it's a mean review. I don't care if you have negative things to say. I would just love to hear some feedback on the podcast. The GSMC Marketing Podcast is so incredibly important to me and to the GSMC Podcast Network that we really do just want to hear your feedback. We want to know your thoughts and your feelings on the episodes and on the content we are producing, because guys, the content we produce, it's not like it's easy to produce. It's not like I'm just, sitting around on the couch and I pull out a microphone and I just start talking. No, there's some thoughts, there's some work, and there's some research that goes into each and every episode. And I want to create content and put all the time and all of the energy into this podcast if I know it is actually going to benefit you. And guys, I'm not alone in that. Every host for the GSMC Podcast Network cares so incredibly much about their podcast, and you can tell by listening. There is so much work, so much effort, and so much time that goes into everyone's episodes and the content we produce. Which, speaking of, if you didn't know, the GSMC Podcast Network is so much bigger than just this one podcast. We have sports, entertainment, social media, beauty, TV, tech. Oh my gosh, I love the tech podcast. It is one of my favorites, hands down. We are basically your one-stop shop for all things podcast. If you want content, if you are craving some juicy content right now during the coronavirus, then go ahead and just scroll through the hundreds and hundreds of episodes we have on almost every single subject you could imagine. It truly is, I find, so inspiring to see all this content getting produced at the level that we're producing it at. There are so many hosts that just care so deeply about their podcast and about the content they create for their listeners. So I encourage you to go check some of those out. I always recommend the tech podcast because it is my favorite. However, this week I think I'm going to recommend the book podcast because that one is also one of my favorites. I've really been loving it lately. Guys, I think if you have a podcast you love and you want me to listen to, you want me to check out, please let me know. I would love to hear it because, again, we're all stuck in the same boat. We're all waiting for this pandemic to end. And for some of us, that means listening to podcasts and trying to educate ourselves or entertain ourselves in a new way. So please drop it in the review down below. Reach out through social media. You can contact me in my personal social media. It is Mackenzie with an M-A-C, not an M-C. Jaquish, J-A-Q-U-I-S-H. You can find me on all social media platforms, including through the GSMC Podcast Network. So find me, review our podcast, review this podcast, and let me know your thoughts. For now, though, let's jump right back into today's episode by going over some famous marketing examples from the adult beverage world. The first one is Dos Equis, the most interesting commercial in the world. So a few years ago, Dos Equis started doing the most interesting commercial in the world as their main brand. They had the most interesting man in the world on the commercials where he talks about all the interesting things he has done with his life, including drink his favorite beer, Dos Equis. So how does this relate back to some of the marketing strategies we talked about earlier? Number one, they are using humor. The humor that they use in the Dos Equis commercials really is the main focus of the ads. It is to engage you in a comedic way and to make light of something really interesting. So they're engaging people with a comedic tone. This way it becomes more of an entertainment product rather than a commercial. So, number 2, Aviation Gin. Aviation Gin uses that comedic element probably more than any other alcohol brand. They also use, though, pop culture references and other events going on in the world. They have poked fun at the Fire Festival, Peloton bikes, leap year birthdays, and how they even make their gin. They have become a parody of alcohol advertisements, and honestly, I'm here for it. I think they're entertaining, interesting, and they use all of the strategies, if not more, than what we talked about earlier. They really are the perfect example of how you need to pay attention to what is happening in your industry, as well as what is happening in the outside world. They also are very good at building a community. Every photo I have ever posted, and I tag Aviation Gin likes the photo. They always comment. They're very, very good at engaging with their audience and trying to build a community for people to live within the world. Number 3, Smirnoff Ice, hanging out at home. So this has been a new commercial that has come out recently because of the coronavirus. So they understood that summer is a big time for their product. It is probably Smirnoff Ice's biggest season. They really do rely on those big festivals and events to sell their products. So when the coronavirus hit and all of those big events closed down, they were sort of left in a lurch of how are we going to still move product. So these commercials basically are saying, we know you want to go out and party. We know you want to go out and see your friends. And I think at one point they even say, I know you want to touch your face right now. But why would you? Instead, you can stay at home and still drink Smirnoff Ice and still have a party. If there's one thing you should take away from any Smirnoff Ice commercial or just Smirnoff commercial in general, is how strong their branding is. No matter what, due to the costumes, the tone, the lighting, everything is all within their brand guidelines. It is the perfect example of how you can curate a brand and then have it reflect through even a simple costume. Number 4, Captain Morgan's Captain commercial. I'm sure you saw it. It was a pretty big commercial that came out a few years ago, I believe, on a Super Bowl commercial. It is a captain walking into a bar, and they are all different types of captains. There's a sea captain, there's the pirate captain, that's obviously the mascot, there's a pilot captain, just captains all around. And then an average Joe guy walks in and he is still greeted as a captain because he is drinking Captain Morgan. Again, this is building that community, showing some comedy, but also using the branding through the mascot of Captain Morgan himself. Finally, number 5, Grey Goose Vodka. Grey Goose Vodka has established themselves as the luxury brand of alcohol. They are the ones you pick if you are looking to spend a little extra money to invest in your drink, as they put it. And that is so clear when you take a look at all of their branding, all of their marketing, and all of their communications with their audience. They want you to take them seriously. And it's good for their company, it's good for their product, and it is good for their audience to see them in that serious light. Okay, everyone, we are going to go ahead and say goodbye for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed tonight's episode of the GSMC Marketing Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Please rate, review, and subscribe if you enjoyed the episode, and I'll see you next time.
You've been listening to the GSMC Marketing News Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on SoundCloud, Stitcher, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to any podcast app, and you'll find all of the shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, from business news to weird news, you'll find it all on the GSMC Podcast Network. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.